At my brother's wedding, I stood quietly among the guests, serving drinks and trying to stay invisible the way I always had. But the moment the bride's father saw my face, his expression changed, like he had just uncovered a secret that was never meant to be found. My name is Livia Hale. I'm 23 years old. For all 23 of those years, I lived in the Caldwell family mansion, but not for a single day was I allowed to forget that I was not one of them. I ate last. I slept in the basement. I woke up at 5 every morning to mop floors, do laundry, trim flowers, make breakfast, polish the staircase banister, prepare warm water for Mr. and Mrs. Caldwell, and then stand silently until they gave me my next task. My brother, Ethan Caldwell, was different. He had the biggest room on the 3rd floor, high ceilings, windows overlooking the artificial lake, and a sleek black sports car shining in the garage. When Ethan woke up close to noon, a hot breakfast was already waiting for him. When he threw his suit jacket over a chair, I had to run and pick it up. When he got angry because his tie wasn't pressed properly, I was the one who got blamed. I never called Gerard Caldwell and Monica Caldwell my parents. Not because I didn't want to, but because I wasn't allowed to. From the time I was very young, I had been taught that some children were born to sit at the big dining table, while others were born to clear it for everyone else. I belonged to the second kind. Whenever I accidentally called them father or mother, Monica would look at me with eyes as cold as steel and say, "Address us properly. Don't forget your place." I used to believe it. Believe that I truly was lesser than other people. Believe that I should be grateful I was kept alive, given somewhere to sleep, and clothes to wear, even if most of them had once belonged to an old housemaid. I had no birth certificate, no ID card, no school records. Monica said all of my papers had been destroyed in a fire when I was little, and that things like that didn't matter for someone like me. Someone like me. I hated that phrase, even though for years I never dared to hate it out loud. The basement was my world. A narrow bed beside an old boiler, damp walls, the smell of metal and dust clinging to the air. In winter, cold crept through the cracks until my thin blankets felt useless. I would curl up tightly, listening to laughter drifting down from upstairs, telling myself that at least today I hadn't done anything wrong enough to be punished. There were unspoken rules in the Caldwell house. I wasn't allowed to sit at the table with them. I wasn't allowed to look guests in the eye during parties. I wasn't allowed to leave through the front gate without permission. I wasn't allowed to talk about myself unless I was asked. And I was never, ever supposed to tell anyone that I had grown up there. If someone asked, Monica would smile and say I was the poor little help they kept on out of pity. I once asked her why I couldn't go to school like Ethan. Monica set down her teacup, looked me up and down, and answered lightly, "Your mind isn't meant for books. It's better suited to cleaning." But I learned anyway. I learned in secret, from old magazines in the changing room, from food labels in the kitchen, from receipts, place cards, and business cards guests left behind. I sounded out words under the weak yellow light in the basement. I learned math from the change left over after grocery trips. Numbers became the only thing in my life that ever felt orderly. 2 plus 2 was always 4. No one could turn it into 3 just because they were richer than I was. The night before the wedding, Monica came down to the basement and tossed me a cream-colored serving uniform with stiff lace trim. "Tomorrow's guests are important. Don't embarrass the family." I held the dress, my fingers tightening around the cheap fabric. "Tomorrow is Ethan's wedding." "Exactly." Monica smiled. "And that is why you need to work harder than usual." I didn't know why those words stabbed so sharply into my chest. Maybe because deep down, some foolish part of me had still hoped to be seen as his sister on the most important day of his life. Just once. Just a normal dress. Just a decent place in the family photographs. Just one introduction where I was named as family. But the next morning, when I walked past Ethan carrying a tray of champagne in his custom tuxedo, he looked me up and down and laughed with his friends. "Oh, this is Livia, the longest-serving help in our house. More loyal than a guard dog." They all burst out laughing. I stayed upright. My hands didn't shake. I didn't let the tray tilt. But my face burned, and my mouth filled with a bitter metallic taste. I thought that would be the most humiliating moment of the day, until the bride's father stared at me as if he had just seen a ghost come back to life. And a few minutes later, he pulled me aside behind a row of white flower columns, his voice rough with shock. "Do you," he said, never taking his eyes off my face, "have any idea who your real mother is?" I froze, because no one had ever asked me that question in 23 years, and because for the first time in my life, I was afraid of the answer. I couldn't answer that question, not because I didn't want to, but because I honestly didn't know what to say. The man standing in front of me was Alaric Voss, the father of the bride, Celine Voss. He was the kind of man whose presence automatically lowered the volume in a room by a fraction. His dark gray formal suit fit perfectly, his silver-streaked hair was neatly combed, and his eyes were sharp without being cold. At that wedding, everyone looked at him the way people look at power when it enters a room. But the way he looked at me wasn't superior. It was shaken. I tightened my grip on the serving napkin in my hand. I don't know." His throat moved with difficulty. "You mean that?" I nodded. The word truth felt almost laughable, painfully so. There were too many things in my life I had never been allowed to know were true. Outside, a string quartet was playing a soft wedding piece. Glasses clinked together like faint rain. The scent of white flowers hung heavily in the air. It was the kind of luxurious wedding where petals covered the stone walkway in thick layers. And I, in my too-tight serving uniform, was standing before a stranger who looked at me as if I were a missing piece from an old story. He asked me my name.
Livia Hale.
"Who gave you that name?" "I don't know," I said quietly. "That's just what I've always been called." His expression darkened. "You've lived with a Caldwell family since childhood?" "Yes." "Do you have any papers? Old photographs? A hospital bracelet? A letter? Anything?" I let out a short, bitter laugh. "I'm not even trusted with the key to my own room." Alaric Voss went silent for a few seconds. Then his eyes dropped to my left wrist, where there was a small faded flower-shaped birthmark near the bone. I'd had it for as long as I could remember. Monica used to say it looked unlucky. He inhaled slowly, then spoke as if each word had to be dragged out of his chest. "My sister had a birthmark in that exact place. And your eyes," he stopped, his voice turning hoarse. "They look exactly like hers." A chill ran down my spine. No one had ever told me I looked like anyone before. In the Caldwell house, I existed as something separate, rootless, detached, with no history. A tool that worked. So, hearing even one sentence like "you look like someone" was enough to make the whole structure in my mind tremble. I remembered the first time I realized how different I was from the Caldwells. I was about 7. Ethan was having a piano lesson with a private tutor. I stood outside the doorway. Watching his pale fingers move across the keys like luxury was just another game for him. I asked Monica whether, after I finished cleaning the tea room, I might learn one simple song. She turned and slapped me so fast my ears rang. "Do you even know how to wash your hands properly before you think about touching that piano?" After that, I never asked again. When I was 10, I followed a delivery man to the gate just to get a glimpse of the road outside. Gerard caught me. He took a thin cane from the storage room and struck the backs of my legs 3 times, hard enough to leave me burning all night. People like you only cause trouble out there. When I was 13, I asked if I could attend evening classes at the church near the neighborhood. Gerard didn't even look at me. "Investing in you would be like pouring money down a drain." When I was 16, Ethan hosted a birthday party. The house was full of silver balloons, warm lights, and the smell of frosted cake. I accidentally spilled some sauce on a tablecloth while cleaning up. Ethan grabbed my chin in front of everyone and smirked. "Look carefully. Some people are born to be served, and some are born to serve. If you forget your place, I'll remind you." Everyone laughed. I used to think maybe I was an orphan they had taken in, that their coldness came from the fact that I wasn't blood. But even that comfort became twisted eventually. Because even if a child isn't blood, nobody raises them the way someone keeps unpaid labor. Alaric Voss heard only a little of what I said, but it was enough to make his face tighten. He didn't press me. He didn't overdo pity. He just listened in silence, as if every fragment I handed him fell like stones into a deep well inside him. "What year were you born?" he asked. "They told me 2003.
They.
I swallowed. "Mr. and Mrs. Caldwell." Back in the reception hall, Monica was glancing around, probably noticing I had been gone too long. She frowned the moment she saw me standing close to Alaric Voss. I knew that look. It was the look that came right before her voice turned sweet for strangers and sharp as broken glass for me. "I need to get back to work," I said quickly. Alaric Voss nodded, but before I stepped away, he called after me. "Livia." I turned. "From now until the end of tonight, don't be alone with the Caldwells." My heart thudded hard.
Why?
He didn't answer right away. He just looked directly at me, as if weighing how much to say. Then, finally, he said, "Because I don't trust them." That sentence made my entire body go numb. My whole life, I had lived in fear of being called ungrateful. I had been trained to believe that no matter how I was treated, I had no right to question the people who had raised me. And now a man I had known for less than 10 minutes had looked straight through the polished image of that family and said aloud what I had never even dared to think. I went back into the wedding hall carrying my tray, but my mind wasn't there anymore. Everything around me felt strange. Ethan's laughter sounded shrill. Monica's smile looked knife-painted. Gerard was chatting with guests in his usual polished way, but now I could only remember his hand tightening hard around my upper arm until it bruised, all because I had broken a vase once. And then, during the family photographs, something happened no one could have predicted. The photographer was arranging everyone when Alaric Voss turned and pointed straight at me. "That girl should be in this picture too." The whole space seemed to freeze. Monica gave a strained laugh. "Oh, she's just the help." "Is that so?" Alaric asked, his eyes still fixed on me. "Because I think she belongs with the family." Monica went white, and I knew that from that moment on, some kind of door had been opened. I just didn't know whether there was light behind it, or a darkness even worse than the place I had slept for most of my life. When Alaric Voss asked that I be included in the family wedding photograph, I felt as though the entire garden had gone silent, even though the quartet was still playing. Every eye turned toward me like hundreds of tiny needles pressing into my skin. Monica reacted first. She smiled, but the corners of her mouth had gone stiff. "Mr. Voss, that's very funny. The girl doesn't belong in the family photo." "I just said she does," Alaric replied. His voice wasn't raised. It wasn't sharp, but it made the people standing nearby instinctively step back. Ethan stood beside the bride, Celine, holding a champagne glass, and frowned. "Mr. Voss, I think you're mistaken. She's just—" "I know exactly who I'm speaking to," Alaric cut in. I had never seen Ethan interrupted like that in front of a crowd. His face flushed briefly, then hardened with anger. To Ethan, humiliation had never been about being wrong. It was about being seen losing control. Celine Voss stood beside him, one hand resting on his arm, her gaze shifting between her father and me. She didn't look irritated the way I expected. Instead, there was real confusion in her eyes, as if for the first time she was watching the polished surface of her husband's family begin to crack. "What's your name?" Celine asked softly. "Livia," I answered. Monica immediately cut in. "Livia isn't used to being photographed. It would be better if she went back to work." Alaric looked at Monica as if she were a rusted lock. "I think everyone can wait." The photographer looked so flustered he nearly dropped his camera. Finally, at Alaric's nod, I walked forward slowly. Never in my life had I stood so close to the Caldwells under flattering light and in front of so many guests. Never had I been placed in the same frame as them. I stood at the edge, a little apart from Ethan, my hands ice-cold with tension. When the camera flashed, I caught Gerard staring at me. It wasn't the look of a strict adoptive father. It was the look of a man watching something slip out of his grasp. After the photos, Monica grabbed my arm hard and dragged me into the side hallway leading toward the service area. Her heels struck the stone floor in short, sharp clicks. The moment the door closed, the gracious smile vanished from her face. "What did you say to him?" she hissed through clenched teeth. Nothing. Her grip tightened. Don't lie to me. I only answered when he asked my name. Monica stared at me, her eyes narrowing. In that moment, I caught the familiar scent of her perfume, that rich, sweet smell that had always meant fear to me as a child. She leaned closer and lowered her voice. You'd better remember your place. If a nameless little nobody like you tries to make trouble at this wedding, I will make you regret it. I was used to words like that. But something felt different now. Maybe because Alaric's question was still ringing in my ears. Maybe because for the first time, someone outside that house had looked at me and not seen an object. Maybe because a door had opened a crack and I couldn't pretend I had never glimpsed light. I gathered the courage to ask, why did he say I look like someone in his family? Monica let go of me as if I had burned her. It was only for a second, but I saw it clearly. Fear. Then it vanished just as quickly. Because he's old, she said, turning away. Old people imagine things. I knew she was lying. From that afternoon on, the air around me changed completely. Two men in dark suits I had never seen before were lingering around the reception area. Not openly, but close enough that I noticed whenever Monica or Gerard moved toward me. One of them always seemed to appear somewhere nearby. Once, while I was clearing glasses from a side table, Alaric passed by and quietly said, "Just keep acting normal." Normal. The words suddenly sounded foreign. Late that night, after guests had started to leave, I was carrying dirty tablecloths down toward the laundry area when I noticed the storage room door beside it standing slightly ajar. I heard Gerard's voice inside. "We need to leave sooner than planned." Monica's voice came back, sharp as a blade. "We can't. Leaving now would only make him more suspicious." "He already is suspicious." I froze behind the laundry cart. Monica lowered her voice, but I still heard every word. "The girl doesn't know anything. She's never known anything. But if he starts investigating..." "So what?" Monica cut in. "There's no paperwork tying her to us. We erased everything years ago." My heart pounded so hard my ears rang. I stepped back too quickly, and one of the laundry cart wheels gave a tiny squeak. Inside the room, silence. The door swung open. Gerard appeared in the doorway, tall and grim. "What are you doing there?" I forced myself to sound normal. "Taking the tablecloths to be washed." He stared at me for so long it became hard to breathe. Then he stepped closer and stopped right in front of me. "What did you hear?" "Nothing." He raised his hand. Years of reflex made me flinch before I could stop myself. That tiny movement alone said everything. Gerard's eyes darkened. But the hand he had lifted didn't come down. From the far end of the hallway, a deep male voice said, "Is there a problem?" It was one of the men in dark suits I had seen earlier. Gerard immediately lowered his hand and put on his polished expression again. "Nothing at all. We were just reminding her to be careful with her work." The man nodded, but he didn't leave. He just stood there like a deliberate shadow. Gerard gave me one last look, full of an unspoken threat, then turned away. I was trembling so badly, I had to grip the laundry cart just to stay upright. Not only because I was scared, but because the pieces were starting to fit together into something far more horrifying than I had ever imagined. Asterisk erased everything. Asterisk. Asterisk leave sooner. Asterisk. Asterisk the girl doesn't know anything. Asterisk. The girl. They never used that word for me when it was just the three of us. That night, the wedding ended with fireworks exploding over the lake. Everyone looked up at gold and silver bursts opening across the sky, while the music swelled. I stood in the shadows near a side veranda, the smell of fireworks smoke mixing with wilted lily of the valley. Alaric Voss walked up beside me and handed me a business card. "Tomorrow," he said, "come to this address. Alone, or with someone you trust." I looked at the card. It wasn't a corporate address. It was a residence in the northern outskirts. "I don't have anyone I trust," I said. His expression softened, sad in a way that felt old. "Then trust me this once." I hadn't answered, yet when Monica's voice called my name from behind us, sweet enough to make my skin crawl. By the time I looked back, Alaric had already stepped away as if no private conversation had taken place at all. I hid the card inside my sleeve. And for the first time in my life, I brought a secret back to my sleeping space in the basement. But the next morning, the moment I came up the stairs, Monica was already waiting for me. I knew they were watching me the second I saw Monica standing at the bottom of the main staircase. They didn't lock me in the basement. They had never needed to do that to control me. An expression, an order, a threat placed in exactly the right spot had always been enough. I had learned to stay within the corner of the house they assigned to me without needing chains. But that morning, everything felt so different I couldn't pretend otherwise. Monica was fully dressed unusually early, her hair perfectly done, her lipstick flawless, as if she were about to receive guests instead of monitor the girl who had served champagne at a wedding the night before. She looked at me from the foot of the stairs and smiled. "You're staying in the house today," she said. "Why?" "There's still plenty to do after the wedding. And I don't want you wandering around." Wandering around. I tightened my grip on the railing. "I always go shopping on Saturdays." "Not today." I stepped down one more stair. "What are you afraid of?" Monica's smile thinned. "I'm protecting you from people who like to invent stories." "Or protecting yourself?" The air between us froze. Gerard appeared from the dining room, holding a coffee cup, his voice low and rough. "Don't try to be smarter than your place." I looked at the two of them, and for the first time the feeling became clear enough to terrify me. They weren't just managing me. They were guarding me. I turned and went back down toward the basement, my heart pounding. Alaric Voss's card was still hidden in the lining of my pillow, along with the old phone I had secretly kept after Ethan threw it away. No SIM card, barely any battery, but if it caught a little signal or Wi-Fi, maybe it could still receive a message. I turned it on. The mansion's Wi-Fi password had been changed. I closed my eyes for 1 second and forced myself to think. Think, Livia. Don't panic. You've survived this long by watching. Do that now. Above me came the sound of footsteps. The gardener outside. The kitchen door opening and closing. The whole house was in motion, but the air felt like a trap had already been set. I was about to turn the screen off when the phone buzzed weakly. A message appeared, probably because the device had picked up a little signal from the secondary network near the garage. "I'm at the back gate. If you read this, find a way out." I froze. "Alaric." At that exact moment, Monica came down into the basement. I hid the phone behind my back, but she had already seen my face. Her eyes dropped to my hand and sharpened. "What are you holding?" "Nothing." "Give it to me." I stepped back. Monica lunged. We struggled in the cramped room, and the phone slipped from my hands, skidding across the concrete floor toward the table leg. Monica reached it first. The screen was still lit. She read the message and looked up, her face drained white. I had never seen her that afraid. She shut the screen off immediately, shoved the phone into her pocket, and rushed out of the basement. I heard her calling for Gerard in a voice that had lost every trace of composure. I didn't think. I moved. I ran after her, up the service stairs, and through the laundry area. Gerard was already coming fast down the main hallway. There was no polished civility left on his face now. Only raw anger. "Stop." I turned and ran toward the side door, leading to the back lawn. Gerard's heavy footsteps thundered behind me. Morning air slammed into my face when I threw the door open. The grass was wet with dew. In the distance, the back gate stood half open. A black car was parked just outside. I ran as if my life depended on it. And behind me, Gerard roared one sentence that turned my blood to ice. "Grab her before this falls apart." I had never run that fast in my life. Years in the Caldwell mansion had given me hands used to labor and legs used to standing for hours, but nothing had prepared me for the feeling of sprinting across a dew-soaked lawn with my whole life hanging on a shrinking stretch of distance. Wind cut across my face. My heartbeat pounded loudly in my ears. My serving dress snagged against my knees, turning every step into a struggle. I could hear Gerard behind me, heavy, fast, furious. "Livia." His voice tore through the gray morning. I didn't turn around. I had turned around too many times in my life, whenever they called my name. Every time I turned back, it pulled me right into the same pit all over again. Today, for the first time, I only knew how to keep moving forward. The back gate was less than 20 meters away when a figure appeared from outside. It was the dark-suited man I had seen at the wedding. He threw the gate open and ran in. "Miss Livia, this way." I veered toward him, slipping hard on the wet paving stones. He caught my arm just as Gerard came close enough to reach me. I was yanked through the gate and nearly fell against the black car. The back door flew open. Gerard stopped inside the property line, face red, breath heavy. He didn't dare step past the gate. I didn't know whether it was because of the man beside me, the car, or the security camera mounted on the stone pillar above us. I only knew he stood there with his fists clenched tight. "You're ruining your own life," he shouted. "Nobody out there wants you." I froze for half a second. That was the sentence I knew best in the world. It had kept me in place so many times, like an invisible chain wrapped around my ankle. But standing there in the cold air with the gate open, I suddenly realized the worst part was not the idea that nobody out there wanted me. It was that for 23 years, the people who claimed to have raised me had never once believed I was worth wanting. The dark-suited man said quietly, "Get in." I climbed into the car. The door slammed shut. The vehicle pulled away fast and smooth. Through the dark-tinted glass, I saw Monica running toward the gate, her hair loose, her face pale. She stood beside Gerard, watching the car disappear with an expression that wasn't grief over losing a daughter. It was fear over losing control. I sat stiffly against the leather seat, my hands cold in my lap. The soft flow of air conditioning and the clean smell of the interior felt so unfamiliar that it made me tense. The man beside me handed me a bottle of water. "You're safe now," he said. I held the bottle, but didn't open it.
"Who are you?" "Jonas Reed," he said.
"I work for Mr. Alaric Voss." "In what way?" He looked at me for 1 second, then answered directly. "Personal security." The phrase made me feel oddly relieved and almost absurdly amused. I had never imagined I would one day need security just to leave my own home. The car drove for almost 40 minutes before stopping at a tall iron gate opening onto a wide property lined with dark cypress trees. The estate beyond it wasn't flashy in the way the Caldwell mansion was. It was grand but quieter, made of pale stone and broad glass, like a place where people actually lived instead of staged their success. On the front steps, Alaric Voss was already waiting. He came down as soon as I stepped out of the car. "Are you hurt?" I shook my head. He gave one short nod, like he was hiding relief. "Come inside." The first room I was brought to was a living room overlooking the east garden. Floor-to-ceiling glass. Morning sunlight spread across a cream rug and pale gray sofas. Tea, bread, and cut fruit were laid out on the table. I stood in the middle of that room and didn't dare sit, like an animal too used to cages to believe the door had actually opened. An older woman with silver hair pinned neatly up came in. "I'm Mara Ellison," she said gently. "I'm the housekeeper here. If you need anything, ask me." Housekeeper, but different. There was no command in her voice, only decency. She handed me a simple light blue outfit and told me the bathroom at the end of the hall had already been prepared. I looked down at my serving uniform, the hem stained with mud, and realized only then that my hands were shaking. The hot water running over my shoulders nearly made me cry. I stood under it for a long time, letting the soap wash away the smell of wine, wedding flowers, the damp chill of my basement sleeping space, and panic. When I looked at myself in the mirror afterward, I almost didn't recognize the girl wearing clean clothes without the Caldwell name attached to them. When I returned to the living room, Alaric was waiting. A thin black folder lay on the table. He motioned for me to sit, but he himself stood and paced a few steps first. I could tell he was tense too. "I won't force too much on you at once," he said. "But I need to say this first. Last night, after the wedding, I contacted my family's private investigators. What you told me about your papers, about not being allowed an education, and about the Caldwell's reaction, all of it points to something serious." I looked at the folder. "Who am I?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he opened it and pulled out an old photograph, slightly yellowed with age. A young woman was holding a newborn in front of a sunlit window. She had dark brown hair, green eyes, and a smile so radiant it hurt to look at. I couldn't breathe, because she looked like a gentler future version of me. "This is my sister," Alaric said quietly.
Elena voz.
He pointed to the baby in the picture. "And this is her daughter. She disappeared from the hospital 3 days after she was born." I heard my heart beating, slow and heavy as a hammer. "That baby," I couldn't finish the sentence. Alaric looked directly at me. "I can't confirm anything based on appearance alone, but there are too many matches.
The year.
The signs. Your face. The birthmark on your wrist. And the Caldwell's reaction." I sat perfectly still. The room was full of sun, but I felt freezing. If what he was saying was true, then my life hadn't just been unfair. It had been a lie from the very beginning. Every punishment, every insult, every year I had been forced to sleep in the basement and live like a servant. It hadn't been fate. It had been deliberate. "Why?" I asked. "If they didn't want me, why keep me?" Alaric was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "I'm afraid I know the answer, but I need proof before I say it." He slid a consent form toward me. "I want this to be your decision. No one will force you. If you sign, we can do an urgent DNA test today. If you're not ready, I will still protect you." I looked at the paper.
Just a few simple lines.
But it felt like a door to a possibility there was no returning from. To sign meant accepting that everything I had believed could collapse completely. Not to sign meant locking myself back inside the old darkness, where at least the lies were familiar. I picked up the pen. The tip touched the paper, and my hand shook so badly my signature almost came out crooked.
Livia Hale.
That name sat there on the white page, small and lonely. I swallowed and asked, "If the result shows I really am the baby in that photograph, what happens to the Caldwell family?" Alaric's eyes turned colder than I had ever seen them. He spoke slowly, each word laid down like a blade. "Then, for the first time in their lives, they will have to answer for what they did to you." The DNA test was done that same afternoon. I had never imagined that one simple cheek swab could make it feel as though an entire life was being pried open. The medical technician came from a private, high-security lab. He explained every step calmly, as if this were routine paperwork. But for me, it was the strangest moment of my life. A few cells from my own body were about to answer a question no one had ever allowed me to ask. After taking my sample, they took a comparison sample from Alaric Voss. Because he was my likely maternal uncle, the match would still be highly reliable in an urgent case. I sat on the edge of my chair watching it all happen, my hand wrapped around my left wrist where the small flower-shaped birthmark rested under my skin. Suddenly, I remembered something old. So old, I wasn't even sure whether it was real or only a dream that had returned again and again since childhood. A room filled with warm golden light, a soft smell, almost like dried flowers. A woman's voice, singing very close to me. I didn't remember words, only the rhythm of a lullaby so gentle that whenever I woke from it, I felt as if I had just lost something. I had never told anyone about that memory. That afternoon, Alaric showed me more information the investigators had gathered overnight. The Caldwell family had told different stories about me to neighbors and acquaintances over the years. Sometimes I was introduced as an orphan they had adopted. Sometimes as the child of an old servant who had been left behind. Sometimes as someone they had taken in. There wasn't a single legal document supporting any of those stories. No school enrollment. No proper medical history. No lawful guardianship record. I stared at the pages and dates, my stomach tightening. "I was never taken to a real hospital," I said. "Just a private doctor a few times when I got very sick." Alaric looked up. "Do you remember his name?" I shook my head. Only that he was very quiet. And Monica was always in the room when he examined me. Mara Ellison brought in tea just then. She set a cup in front of me, along with a small plate holding a warm slice of pastry. "You should eat something," she said. "When a person learns too much all at once, the body still deserves to be treated gently." The sentence was simple, but I had to look down and pretend to straighten my sleeve so she wouldn't see my eyes fill. Because no one in my life had ever cared for me without attaching conditions to it. That evening, Celine Voss came. I had assumed she would stay away from me. After all, I was the fracture that had split her wedding day in half. But Celine walked into the living room looking tired, still wearing faint traces of the makeup from earlier, though she had changed into a simple beige knit outfit. She looked less like a wealthy bride and more like someone trying to digest a shock of her own.
Can I sit? She asked.
I nodded. Celine sat across from me, her hands clasped together. I knew the Caldwell family wasn't perfect, but I never imagined things were. She trailed off and inhaled. I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner. I looked at her in surprise. You didn't do anything wrong.
No.
Celine looked down. I think I did. Ethan called you old household help, and I accepted that because it was convenient. I saw that you were exhausted. I saw the way you avoided looking at people. I saw Monica order you around during the wedding, and nobody reacted.
But I still chose not to ask.
She looked back up at me. Sometimes silence from outsiders is just another kind of complicity.
I didn't know what to say.
Her honesty surprised me. I left the Caldwell house, Celine said. That marriage was over before it began. Ethan got furious the moment my father insisted on finding out the truth about you. He wasn't worried about you at all. He was terrified the family's reputation would be damaged. She let out a bitter little laugh. A man can reveal himself much faster than I expected. I studied her for a long moment. Celine wasn't like me, but there was something in her eyes that felt familiar. The look of someone realizing they had been deceived by what they thought was solid. By nightfall, the East Garden had sunk into low golden lights outside the windows. I was given a guest room overlooking the cypress trees. The bed was so soft my body didn't know what to do with it, and I lay stiff for a long time. On the bedside table were a lamp, a few books, a glass of water, and a handwritten note from Mara. The door is not locked. You are free to come and go. I read that line several times. Asterisk, the door is not locked. Asterisk. Such a simple statement that most people wouldn't think twice about it. But to me, it felt like a whole new language. Around midnight, I still couldn't sleep, so I stepped into the hallway. Soft night lighting glowed across the wooden floor. From the office at the far end, I heard voices talking quietly. The door was nearly closed. I hadn't meant to listen, but when I heard my own name, I stopped. Jonas Reed's voice said, "We checked Gerard Caldwell's old financial records. There was a large cash withdrawal 23 years ago, right around the time the child disappeared." Alaric asked, "Source?" "Through an account registered to a shell company that no longer exists. But there's something more important." Jonas paused. That same year, Monica Caldwell briefly volunteered at the private hospital where Elena gave birth. I grabbed the doorframe. It felt like all the blood drained from my body. "You think they targeted her in advance?" Alaric asked. "Very likely," Jonas said. "And if that's true, then this isn't just about concealing identity or exploiting labor inside a household. It was a deliberate abduction." I took one step back and accidentally brushed against a decorative table in the hallway. The crystal vase on it trembled faintly. Inside the office, the conversation stopped. I turned to leave, but the office door opened. Alaric stood there, his face darkening when he saw me. He looked at me for 1 second, long enough to understand how much I had heard. I heard my own voice come out. So quietly, I almost didn't recognize it. Did they choose me before I even got to live? No one answered right away. That silence was the most terrifying answer of all. The next morning, the DNA results came. I don't remember exactly how I was holding my teacup. I only remember the warmth of the porcelain against my hands and the way Alaric Voss's office seemed brighter than usual because of the morning sun pouring through the tall window. On the desk was a sealed envelope from the lab. Such a thin, light, ordinary object, and somehow it held the power to tear apart an entire human life. Alaric didn't open it right away. He looked at me first. "I want you to decide whether you want to hear it now." I nodded. There was no road back anymore. He opened the envelope with a silver letter opener. The tiny sound of paper tearing was as sharp to me as a crack in ice. Alaric scanned the first line, then stopped. I saw his eyes close for a second, like he was steadying himself. Livia, his voice dropped lower. The results show a 99.97% probability of a niece-uncle biological relationship. I didn't hear the rest clearly. That number rang straight through my chest. 99.97%. Not imagination. Not coincidence. Not a rich man's pity for an unfortunate girl. I was blood. I belonged to another family. A family who had lost me. A family who had probably searched for me. A family that made my whole childhood under the Caldwells seem even more horrifying because it was no longer some vague, unfair fate. It had been stolen. I set down the teacup, though it still clinked faintly against the saucer. My hands were shaking too hard. What was my real name? Alaric looked from the paper to me. When you were born, you were named Ariel Voss. Ariel. The name touched something inside me in a way I couldn't explain, like a sound coming from a room in my memory that had been locked for too long. I repeated it silently to myself. Asterisk Ariel. Asterisk, I didn't know why, but my eyes filled. My sister, Alaric said slowly, Elena Voss, died 5 years after you disappeared. On paper, it was from prolonged collapse after psychological trauma and heart complications. But I know the real cause. She never stopped searching for you. Every phone call from the police, every false lead, every report of a child seen somewhere who looked like you, each one gave her hope and then shattered it again. The room seemed to slow around me. I didn't cry immediately. The emotion was too large, too thick, like a rising tide too big for tears to handle. I just sat there, hearing my life split cleanly into 2 parts, before the sentence and after. Alaric continued, his voice colder now. We have more information too. Monica Caldwell really did volunteer in the maternity ward of the hospital where Elena gave birth. No one paid much attention to her because she was there under the name of a charitable donor to a children's fund. 3 days after you were born, the hospital's cameras lost power for 7 minutes in the West Wing corridor. Your file disappeared from the paper archives that same night. Why didn't anyone find out sooner? I asked, my voice dry. Because they were careful, Jonas Reed answered, entering the room with another file. And because there was an internal hospital scandal that year that corrupted a lot of records. There wasn't enough clean evidence to point to one individual directly. But now, with the DNA, the financial transaction, and possible witness testimony, the situation is different. He laid several copied images on the desk. One showed a blurry young woman in an old security still, wearing a mask and hat. Her face wasn't clear, but the build was very similar to Monica in old society photographs the team had found. The next image showed a transfer of funds from a shell company account to a false identity that had since disappeared. The last was a handwritten note from an old hospital record. Infant room 4B. Mother reports missing identification bracelet. I looked at it and felt sick. Monica used to tell me that in life, everyone had to play the cards they were dealt. She used to say I had simply been born at the bottom. It turned out she was the one who had thrown me there. Not long after, Celine came in. Her wedding ring was gone. She placed her phone on the desk. Ethan has called me 3 times. He keeps asking whether my father is trying to do something. When I asked him if he knew anything about Livia's background, he was silent for too long. I looked up. He knew? I asked. Celine frowned. I don't think he knew everything, but he knew enough to be afraid. That chilled me even more than the DNA. Ethan. The person who had grown up in the same house I had. The person who had seen me wake before dawn, seen me ordered around, scolded, ignored. Even if he hadn't known I was stolen from a hospital, he had still known I was not ordinary hired help. And he still chose to step on me because it made his life easier. Some betrayals do not come from one great secret. They come from watching someone suffer every day and deciding it is normal. By noon, Alaric asked me to sit in on a private meeting with the family's lawyer and the investigators. They didn't speak to me like I was some fragile girl who needed to be sheltered. They laid everything out clearly. It might be possible to begin a high-level criminal investigation if enough evidence was gathered. It might be possible to use the DNA result to freeze assets and stop the Caldwells from moving money. It might be possible to arrange a fake business meeting to lure them to neutral ground where everything could be recorded. I listened, overwhelmed. Then the lawyer asked, "Miss Ariel?" I flinched slightly at the newly old name. He immediately corrected himself.
Saudi.
"What would you like us to call you?" The whole room waited. I took a deep breath. "Livia." I looked down at my hands. "For now, Livia is fine." Alaric nodded and didn't push further. The meeting lasted into the afternoon. When nearly everyone had gone, I remained in the office. On the shelf behind the desk was Elena Voss's framed photograph. The same green eyes, the same cheekbones, the same familiar ache. I walked closer and stared until my throat hurt. "Mom." The word came out rough and strange. I touched the edge of the frame. For 23 years, I had not been allowed to call anyone that. Behind me, Alaric said quietly, "My sister would have loved you without condition." That sentence shattered the wall I had built around my heart. I cried.
Not loudly.
Not dramatically. Just the kind of quiet breaking that makes breathing feel fragile. I cried for the baby who had been carried away from her mother's arms. For the girl forced to live in a basement and believe she was born to serve. For all those years, I had been called worthless, while somewhere out there a mother had searched for me until it killed her. By evening, the investigators had brought back one last piece of information. A woman named Dahlia Mercer, a trainee nurse at the hospital back then, had agreed to meet. She said she remembered a wealthy couple appearing too often around the maternity ward. And she remembered one particular detail. The woman wore a pearl camellia brooch. Monica Caldwell still had a brooch just like that. The final piece was falling into place. And for the first time, I wasn't only the victim being carried along by the truth. I was about to become the person who faced it. The meeting with Dahlia Mercer took place in a private conference room at the Voss family law office. She was in her 60s, thin, slightly stooped by age, but her eyes were still bright and clear. A half-finished cup of chamomile tea sat in front of her on the table. When I walked in, she stood up immediately, as if something inside her compelled it. "I'm sorry," she said before anyone could even introduce us. "I'm sorry I stayed silent so long." I sat down, my palms damp and cold. "You don't owe me an apology." Dahlia shook her head.
Ida.
"Because that day, I saw something wasn't right. But I was young, frightened of losing my job, and those people were too powerful." She studied my face for a long moment, as if trying to reconnect it to the blurred memory of a newborn from decades ago. Then she began to speak. 23 years earlier, St. Maro Private Hospital had served the wealthiest families in Greyhaven. Elena Voss gave birth in the private maternity wing on the west side. That same week, a wealthy couple frequently appeared there under the guise of charitable donors to a newborn fund. The wife dressed elegantly, spoke sweetly, and often brought flowers room to room. The husband was quiet but observant, always watching entrances and exits. Dahlia said she had noticed that woman standing too close to the newborn nursery, despite having no family member there. "Do you remember what they looked like?" the lawyer asked. Dahlia nodded slowly. "I remember the woman more clearly, because of the pearl camellia brooch pinned to her lapel. And I also remember she asked me a very strange question." "What question?" She asked, "If a newborn is missing its identification bracelet for a few minutes, would the hospital notice right away?" The room went heavy. Dahlia continued, 3 days after I was born, the west hallway lost power briefly. When the system came back, a night nurse reported that the baby in room 4B no longer had an identification bracelet. Records were confused. Another baby had been moved. Chaos broke out. The hospital denied negligence, and the Voss family launched a massive search. But what Dahlia knew back then were only fragments. She had no hard proof. And like many powerless people standing in the shadow of money and influence, she had stayed silent. "Until I saw your photograph in the file, Mr. Voss sent," she said, voice thickening. Then I knew I couldn't stay silent anymore. After that meeting, the legal team completed a formal reconstruction, aligning the timeline with the financial records and the DNA results. The chain of events now looked chillingly clear. Monica Caldwell had used a charitable cover to gain access to the maternity ward, worked with Gerard Caldwell during the camera blackout, removed a newborn from the hospital, and later erased paper traces through money and influence. A few months afterward, a large cash transfer moved through intermediaries connected to a network that specialized in false identities and off-the-books documentation. They hadn't just taken me. They had cleared away every road that might have allowed me to prove I existed. I read the summary, my eyes moving over line after line, but one sentence kept striking me in the head. Likely motive: acquisition of an infant and maintenance of absolute control outside legal systems. Acquisition. Not love. Not rescue. Not adoption. Acquisition. That night, Alaric told me directly what he had avoided saying before. I think they kept you so you could become unpaid domestic labor as you grew up. Maybe at first they told themselves another story, but everything they did afterward points there. I sat still in front of the fire, watching the flames reflect in the glass. I used to think at least I had somewhere to belong, even if it was terrible. I laughed softly, bitterly. Turns out I was just a long-term investment. No one contradicted me, because it was true. The final plan was set the following morning. The Voss family would formally invite the Caldwells to a meeting to preserve relations between the two families after the disruption at the wedding. Ethan was desperate to save both his reputation and a business opportunity tied to the Voss empire, which meant he would almost certainly drag his parents there. The location would be a secondary estate owned by Alaric's company, a legally recorded neutral site with law enforcement waiting nearby if enough evidence was triggered. I asked whether I needed to be present. Alaric looked at me for a long moment before replying, "You owe no one this confrontation. But if you want to be there, I will make sure you do not stand in that room alone." I thought about it for hours. In the end, I said yes. Not because I wanted to watch them fall, though part of me did, but because I couldn't let my life be discussed again in a sealed room without the one witness who mattered most. They had decided everything for me for 23 years. I was not letting them do that again. The afternoon before the meeting, I opened the wooden box Mara brought to me. Inside were several things that had belonged to Elena Voss, items Alaric had decided I was ready to see. A baby blanket edged in yellowed lace. A notebook filled with pages of preparation for her first child. And an unsent letter written 3 weeks after I disappeared. The handwriting was soft and slightly slanted. In places, the ink had blurred. If you are alive somewhere, I want you to know there has not been a single day when I stopped searching for you. People tell me to accept it. I won't. People tell me time will lower the pain. They don't understand. You are not pain. You are my child. I stopped there. Tears fell onto the page. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat beside the window, looking out at the black cypress trees in the garden, listening to the wind through their branches like whispers from very far away. For the first time, I said my real name out loud. Ariel. The sound no longer felt unfamiliar. The next morning, I wore the simple cream outfit Mara had prepared for me. No serving dress.
No uniform.
No bow in my hair to remind me of the identity imposed on me. I tied my hair neatly back and looked into the mirror, wondering who this face truly belonged to. When I came downstairs, Alaric was already waiting. Jonas stood near the door. The lawyer and 2 investigators were in the adjacent room. "You can still change your mind," Alaric said. I shook my head.
No.
They lied to me my whole life. Today they answer for it. He gave one slight nod. The car drove toward the western estate under a sky heavy with gray clouds. The lake beside the property was smooth as glass. Everything looked so peaceful it was hard to believe the next few hours might alter several lives. When we arrived, I looked through the window and saw the Caldwell family's silver sedan pull in. Gerard got out first. Monica followed. Ethan was last. The expensive suit was still there. The carefully practiced swagger too. But even from a distance, I could see one thing clearly. For the first time in their lives, they were walking into a room without believing they controlled the rules. The secondary estate where the meeting took place was designed for private dinners and major deals. High ceilings, dark paneled walls, abstract paintings, and tall windows overlooking the still lake behind it. But that day, all of its elegance only made the atmosphere feel colder. I was not placed in the main room at first. According to the lawyer's plan, I sat in an adjoining room behind one-way privacy glass, where I could see everything clearly, while the people inside could not see me. Beside me were Alaric, Jonas, attorney Helena Ward, and two civilian investigators. Beyond them, in the security area, officers from the Norhaven Federal Bureau of Investigation waited under authority to move in once the signal was given. I had never imagined my life would one day involve phrases like *Federal Intervention Order*. Monica Caldwell entered the sitting room first, her perfect smile restored. She wore an ivory suit and the exact pearl camellia brooch Dahlia Mercer had described. The sight of that tiny object made my whole body go cold. Something beautiful, pinned to a lapel during one of the filthiest moments of her life. Gerard followed, chin raised, looking like an annoyed businessman rather than a man who had reason to be afraid. Ethan looked less steady. He kept adjusting his sleeves and glancing around the room as if measuring every distance between himself and whatever might save him. Alaric entered from the opposite door alone. "Thank you all for coming," he said. Monica smiled smoothly. "Of course. After the little incident at the wedding, we wanted very much to clear up the misunderstanding." Misunderstanding. The word cut across my ears like glass. Alaric didn't sit immediately. He stood at the head of the table with both hands resting lightly on the back of a chair. "I want to clear things up as well. First of all, where is the girl called Livia Hale?" Monica tilted her head. "She ran away from her home the morning after the wedding. We've been very worried about her." I almost laughed from sheer disbelief. Worried? After monitoring every move I made and ordering someone to grab me. Gerard spoke next. "We raised her for years. She's emotionally unstable, prone to excitement and fantasy. I hope you haven't accidentally encouraged some poor child to misunderstand her circumstances." "Poor child?" Alaric asked quietly. Ethan cut in, trying to recover his composure. "Mr. Voss, I think the bigger issue here is outsiders twisting our family situation. Livia was taken in by us as a child. If she has some fantasy about being a missing heiress, then honestly, I think she needs treatment, not encouragement." I felt my nails dig into my palms. At last, Alaric sat down. "Is that so? Then I assume your family will have no issue explaining a few basic points." He signaled. Helena Ward entered and placed a thin file in front of each of them. "I am legal counsel for the Voss family," she said. "The files before you contain DNA documentation, historical financial records, witness testimony, and hospital data." Monica's smile vanished first. Gerard didn't touch his folder, but his jaw tightened. Ethan looked toward his parents. It was the first time he actually looked like a frightened child. Helena opened her own folder. "DNA results show that Miss Livia Hale, born under the name Ariel Voss, has a 99.97% biological match to Mr. Alaric Voss. Witness Dahlia Mercer confirms that Mrs. Monica Caldwell was present under suspicious circumstances at St. Maro Hospital during the period when infant Ariel disappeared. Financial records show that Mr. Gerard Caldwell made a large cash withdrawal through a shell company at that same time. Meanwhile, Miss Hale's legal identity is effectively empty. No lawful adoption, no guardianship filing, no registered education, no valid birth registration. Where would you like to begin explaining?" The room thickened. Monica found her voice first. "This is ridiculous. A patchwork of assumptions and emotion. DNA can be falsified." Helena slid a second sealed envelope across the table. 3 independent laboratories. Monica went silent. Gerard leaned back, forcing his voice to stay hard. "Even if the girl is the missing child from that year, no one can prove we took her. It's possible we received her from another circumstance and didn't know her true background." Alaric looked at him as if something filthy had floated to the top of a lake. "Then why didn't you legally adopt her? Why didn't you let her go to school? Why didn't you provide documents? Why was she made to live in the basement? Why did she have to call you Mr. and Mrs. Caldwell while your son called her house help?" Ethan shot to his feet. "She was never abused." Heat rushed into my head. Immediately, Helena pressed a remote. The wall screen lit up. Surveillance footage from the wedding hallway appeared, Monica gripping my arm and dragging me away, face altered with panic. Gerard running after me the next morning across the back lawn, his voice roaring, "Grab her before this falls apart." Ethan went pale. "That was just," he stammered. "Just a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" Alaric's voice turned to ice. "Then keep watching." The screen changed to photographs of the Caldwell basement area taken by investigators under warrant that morning. The rusted narrow bed beside the old boiler, damp walls, the laundry area right next to it, the cane in the storage room, and a thick household ledger in Monica's handwriting assigning chores day after day. I could barely breathe when I saw the place I had once called where I slept projected on a giant screen as physical evidence of a crime. Celine entered at that exact moment. No one had invited her, but she stood in the doorway, voice clear and steady. I also have testimony. During our engagement, Ethan referred to Livia more than once as property in the house. His exact words were, "She can't go anywhere. She has no one." Ethan spun toward her. "Celine, are you insane?" "No," Celine said. "I'm just finally done pretending to be blind." I looked at him then. His face no longer held the polished elegance built from money and entitlement. There was only the naked exposure of someone who had learned to stand on top of others, but never to stand by himself. Helena Ward laid a hand on the final file. "The Caldwell family now has one last opportunity to explain yourselves before law enforcement enters." Monica looked at Gerard. Gerard looked at Ethan. And in that single moment, I saw what I had always felt but never named. They were not a loving family. They were an alliance of convenience, held together by secrecy and control. Once the secret cracked, they started devouring each other. Monica stood first. "It was all him," she shouted, pointing at Gerard. "He arranged everything. I only followed." "Shut up," Gerard barked. Ethan took one step backward like he had just realized he was standing in the middle of a minefield. I knew then that the moment had arrived. There was no shield left, and the door of the private room where I had been sitting slowly opened. When I walked into the main room, all three Caldwells turned at once. I wasn't wearing a serving uniform. I wasn't carrying a tray. I wasn't standing off to the side. I wore a simple cream outfit, my hair neatly tied back, my back straight, my steps slow and steady. That was all. But the look on Monica's face said that to her. This was more terrifying than any stack of evidence. "Livia," she breathed. I stopped at the head of the table. "That is the name you gave me." The room went silent. I looked at them one by one. Gerard, Monica,
Ethan.
Three faces that had cast a shadow over my entire life. Three people who had decided what I ate, where I slept, and what kind of existence I was allowed to have. And yet, standing before me now, under the light of exposure, they looked smaller than they ever had inside my memory. "I have one question," I said. "Out of all the children in the world, why me?" Monica cried first. Not the tears of remorse. The tears of someone watching control slip out of her hands. We just wanted a daughter. You could have adopted one legally." "It was different then," she said, her voice shaking. "At the time we had just lost a major investment, and people around us looked down on us for not having the perfect family image. I saw your real mother at the hospital. She had everything. Money, position, love. Then I saw that baby," her voice caught, her eyes red, but it didn't soften me. "I thought if I took you, my life would become stable." I let out a cold laugh. "Stable for who?" Gerard slammed his hand onto the table. "Don't let her stand there pretending to have moral superiority. Do you have any idea how much it cost us to keep you alive?" That sentence froze the room. Alaric rose at once, but I lifted my hand to stop him. I wanted to hear it. I needed to hear the ugliest truth in their own words. Gerard looked at me, his eyes filled with the old resentment I had known for years. "You were weak as a child, always sick, always crying. You took up time and money. If Monica hadn't insisted on keeping you, I would have." "Would have what?" I asked. He fell silent. I stepped forward. "Given me back to that network? Sold me somewhere else? Left me somewhere and called it running away?" Gerard looked away. His silence answered everything. Ethan spoke next, voice faltering. I didn't know about the kidnapping. I turned to him. Maybe you didn't know from the beginning, I said. But you knew I wasn't normal house staff. You knew I had no papers, no school, no friends, no way out. You knew how I was treated. That's just how this house worked, Ethan shot back, as if that explained anything. I grew up in it. I didn't think about it. Exactly. I nodded once. You didn't think. Because you weren't the one suffering. Celine stood in the doorway, staring at her former husband, as if he were a stranger. That is exactly the problem. Helena Ward signaled to one of the investigators, and a new audio file began to play. This one had been recovered from Ethan's old phone through a cloud backup Celine had legally cooperated in obtaining before ending the marriage. Ethan's voice came through clearly. The girl in the basement? Don't worry. She has no papers. She can't go anywhere. Another male voice laughed and asked, Then why keep her? Ethan in the recording laughed too. Why would we get rid of someone who does everything in the house for free? The sound ended. Ethan's face collapsed like he had been slapped. I didn't feel victory. I just felt a cold, clean emptiness. For years I had told myself maybe I misunderstood, maybe they weren't as bad as it felt. Maybe I was too sensitive. Now there was no maybe left. Monica turned on Ethan as if he had stabbed her. Where did you record that? How was I supposed to know it would be saved? He snapped back. Gerard snarled. You idiot. And then they began devouring one another. Monica blamed Gerard for organizing everything. Gerard said Monica had been obsessed with the perfect family image and pushed him into it. Ethan insisted he was innocent and then accidentally admitted he had been told never to let me go out alone. Every word they spoke peeled another layer off the mask. The lawyer took notes. The investigators marked the timeline. Jonas stood motionless as stone, but I knew he was waiting for the final signal. I did not scream. I did not slam the table. I did not give them the scene they had always wanted so they could call me unstable. I just asked, very calmly, have any of you ever felt ashamed? No one answered. I was waking up at 5 a.m. when I was 8, I said. I scrubbed floors until my knees grew calloused. I taught myself to read from old magazines because you refused to let me go to school. I called the people who kidnapped me Mr. and Mrs. Caldwell because you made me. I lived for 23 years believing I was inferior, worthless, born to serve other people. There were nights I was hungry and still thought I should be grateful. I looked directly at Monica. There was a time you told me I should appreciate the fact that I had a roof over my head. Then I looked at Gerard. You told me nobody out there wanted me. Finally, I turned to Ethan. And you called me a convenient piece of furniture. Ethan opened his mouth, but I didn't let him speak. I want you to hear me clearly. My voice stayed soft, but the entire room went silent for it. What you took from me was not just a childhood. You took my ability to trust myself, to call anyone family, to look into a mirror without seeing someone beneath everyone else. You did not raise me. You trapped me inside a lie. Monica burst into tears. We still fed you, clothed you, housed you. That is the bare minimum required to keep a human being alive. I cut in. It is not love. The words landed like the final cut. Helena turned toward Alaric and gave one small nod. He pressed the button on the radio beneath the table. The large doors opened. 3 agents from the Norhaven Federal Bureau of Investigation entered, followed by 2 financial officers and a regional prosecutor. The lead agent drew out the formal warrant. Mr. Gerard Caldwell, Mrs. Monica Caldwell, you are being taken into custody for investigation relating to infant abduction, documentation fraud, concealment of identity, labor exploitation, and associated charges. Monica screamed. Gerard jumped to his feet, so fast his chair crashed backward. Ethan stumbled away, all the blood draining from his face. I stayed still. And for the first time in my life, I watched them feel fear the way they had made me feel it for 23 years. I had imagined I would feel triumphant the instant the handcuffs clicked shut. The truth was more complicated than that. Cleaner, colder, and just a little painful. Monica resisted first. She staggered backward, mascara running, sobbing that it was all a misunderstanding, that she had loved me in her own way, that I couldn't let the family be destroyed like this. At the word family, something in me almost laughed. Family. That word they only used when they needed to silence me. Gerard tried to hold on to his pride for a few seconds more. He demanded his lawyer, demanded to know who dared insult the Caldwell name, demanded to speak to the prosecutor as if he were still in one of those private rooms where money always outranked truth. But when the investigators reminded him about the shell accounts, the old cash transfers, the witness statements, the recordings, and the temporary freeze on assets, that arrogance began to crack into sweat at his temples. Ethan was the one who showed me the clearest version of his own nature. Not rage, not grief, a kind of stripped-down selfish panic. He grabbed at one of the agents and nearly shouted, "I didn't do anything. I wasn't even there back then. I just grew up in that house." Celine looked at him and said the shortest, clearest thing anyone had said all day. "You grew up with choices. And you always chose whatever benefited you." I will always remember Ethan's face when he heard that. Not because it broke my heart, but because for the first time in his life, someone had said to him what privilege had never forced him to hear. Benefiting from cruelty is still participating in it. When Monica was handcuffed, she turned to me with her voice breaking apart. "Livia, please.
Tell them.
Tell them I never let you starve, that I raised you all these years.
You can't do this to me."
I looked at her for a long time. This was the woman who chose curtain colors for gala seasons, who hosted charity dinners, who smiled at guests and lightly touched my back just to guide me farther into the shadows before introducing me as a pitiable child she had taken in, who had looked at me burning with fever and still made me scrub the staircase because guests were coming, who had slapped me over a stained tablecloth, who had taught me the right angle to lower my head so I would look well-behaved in front of her friends. And now she wanted me to save her with the memory of all the times she hadn't killed me. I said slowly, "You did not keep me because you loved me. You kept me because you wanted to own someone who couldn't fight back." Monica shook her head wildly. "No, no. I am not the girl from the basement anymore." That was when she truly broke. Gerard was let out last. Before he reached the door, he turned and looked back at me. The resentment was still there in his eyes, as if somehow I was the one betraying the rules of the game. "Do you really think they'll accept you?" he said. "A girl with no manners, no background, no proper education. Money won't fix what you are." Years ago, that sentence would have gone straight through my chest. Not today. I stepped a little closer, just enough that he could hear every word without anyone else needing to interrupt. "You're wrong," I said. "What needs fixing was never my nature. What needs exposing is your guilt." He went silent. I looked directly into his eyes and said the line I think I had been waiting my whole life to say. "You did not create my worth. You only tried to bury it." The room seemed to stop for a second. The agents pulled Gerard away. The door shut behind them with one clean, final click. Not loud, but in my ears, it sounded like the last door of my past locking from the other side. When they were gone, the room fell quiet. Celine wiped tears away with her fingertips and stepped aside so the prosecutor could speak briefly with Alaric and Helena about the next procedures. Ethan wasn't handcuffed then, but he was ordered to remain for further questioning and civil financial review regarding the benefits he had received from the family's assets. He sat down heavily in a chair, shoulders curled inward, and for the first time in his life looked like someone who had no idea what to do without his parents clearing the road ahead. He looked up at me once the room had mostly emptied. "Livia," he said, his voice strangely small. "No matter what, we still grew up together." I stood still. He swallowed. "I know I was awful, but I didn't think it was this serious. I just did what this house always did." I thought of all the mornings I carried breakfast to his room, all the times he jerked his chin and expected me to pick things up after him, all the laughter in front of his friends, all the years he slept in warmth while I curled under damp blankets in the basement. Asterisk, I just did what this house always did. Asterisk, that was the excuse of someone who had never been made to pay the price. I'm going to say this once so you remember it for the rest of your life, I told him. You never saw me as your sister. You only saw me as something useful. So don't ask me now for a bond you rejected from the start. His face went white. I turned away. Not because I was angry, but because I was done. That afternoon, no public details were released because the case was still in its early phase, but in Greyhaven social circles, rumors spread fast. The marriage between Ethan Caldwell and Celine Voss was legally terminated within days of the ceremony. Major Caldwell accounts were frozen pending investigation. Business partners who had once crowded around their wedding reception began keeping their distance. People who used to praise Monica's perfection suddenly went quiet. Karma rarely arrives like thunder. Sometimes it comes as every door that once stood open for someone, shutting at once. That evening, I stood on the veranda of the Voss estate watching the lake reflect a purple-gray sky. Alaric stepped out beside me and draped a light shawl over my shoulders. He didn't ask too many questions. He just stood there the way only truly kind people know how to stand, understanding when silence is the gentlest thing they can offer. After a while, I asked, "Do you think there will ever come a time when I stop feeling like I was living the wrong life?" He thought for a few seconds before replying. "Maybe that feeling won't disappear immediately. But one day, you'll realize you were never living the wrong life. You were simply placed in the wrong hands." I stared at the lake for a long time, and for the first time, I didn't see the future as a locked hallway. I saw it as a door just beginning to open. The months that followed were the strangest and most painful of my life. I started with things most people have had for so long they don't even think about them. Personal identification, legal records, therapy, full medical exams, a bank account in my own name, the right to sign my own name without fearing someone would snatch the pen away. Some mornings I woke up, and it took me a few seconds to remember that I no longer had to go back to a sleeping place in the basement. Sometimes when someone called me, "Ariel," I turned a little too slowly, as if my body was still negotiating with the past. In the end, I chose a path in between. On paper, I restored my real name, Ariel Elena Voss. But with the people I trusted, I allowed myself to remain Livia for a little while longer. Not because the old name the Caldwells gave me deserved to stay, but because the girl who had lived under that name for 23 years deserved to be held, not erased as if she had never existed. The case moved faster than I expected. Dahlia Mercer's testimony, the financial records, the partially restored hospital files, the recordings, and the conditions in which I had been made to live in the Caldwell mansion all connected into a chain strong enough for criminal prosecution. In the end, Monica Caldwell received a long prison sentence for direct involvement in infant abduction, concealment of identity, and prolonged exploitation. Gerard Caldwell received an even heavier sentence because of the financial and organizational role he played, as well as obstruction. Ethan did not go away for as long as his parents, but he lost his job, faced civil lawsuits over illicit benefits and fraudulent declarations, and was abandoned by nearly every social connection he had ever relied on. The mansion where I had spent my life was sealed, then sold to satisfy legal judgments and financial penalties. One afternoon, almost a year after the wedding that changed everything, Ethan called me from an unknown number. I nearly let it ring out, but in the end I answered. His voice sounded tired and worn. There was nothing left of the man who had once laughed in a tailored tuxedo. "I just want to talk once." I said nothing. "I have nothing left," he said. "The house is gone. The money's frozen. Friends disappeared. Mom's in prison. Dad," he exhaled heavily. "I know I have no right to ask, but I really need help." I looked out the window of the small study in the East Wing, where I now worked. Late sunlight lay across the desk, where my introductory psychology textbooks, notebooks, pens, and a framed photograph of Elena Voss sat together. By then, my life had already started moving along a path I never would have dared imagine. I had used part of the trust fund my biological mother left behind to complete my educational foundations, enroll in an accelerated program, and apply to Northbridge University to study psychology and trauma. I wasn't studying to prove I was smart to anyone. I was studying because for the first time, Knowledge was no longer something I had to steal from old magazines beside my bed in the basement. It had become a real door. "How much do you need?" I asked flatly. He made a sound like hope had just reached him. But I spoke again before he could imagine too much. "How much do you need before you understand that I'm not the life raft you get to reach for only after you start drowning?" On the other end, silence stretched. I could hear his breathing. I could hear shame too, late, uncertain. Maybe not even real shame. Maybe just the shock of someone finally falling without anyone to catch him. "I'm only going to say this once," I said. "When you had everything, you never saw me as your sister. You saw me as convenient furniture in your house. So now, don't call your desperation family." His voice cracked. "Livia. My name is Ariel." And I hung up. I didn't shake. I didn't cry. I didn't feel guilty. I only felt quiet. It was a strange kind of victory. Not loud. Not cruel. Not about crushing anyone. Just the simple truth that at last, I had stopped turning back toward the place that broke me. In the years that followed, I moved into a bright home near the university. I still saw Alaric on Sunday evenings. Mara kept quietly stocking my refrigerator with extra food as if that were her own private language for care. Celine became an unexpectedly good friend. Together, we learned how to forgive ourselves for not recognizing the truth sooner. I began volunteering with a support organization for teenagers who had survived abuse and coercive family control. The first time I told my story to a small group, my hands shook violently. When I finished, a 17-year-old girl came up to me and said, "You make me feel like I'm not broken." I went into the bathroom afterward and cried for a very long time. Because all my life, I had believed I was broken. Now I understood something different. I was never broken. I was treated like I wasn't a person for so long that I almost believed it. The year I got my Northbridge acceptance letter, Alaric opened a bottle of non-alcoholic cider in the backyard and said my mother would probably be crying with pride. I held the letter in my hands, looked at the bold printed words, and remembered the girl who had sounded out words from old magazines under the dim light of a basement. I wished I could go back and hold her and say, "You were never lesser. You were only trapped in someone else's story." That night, I stood in front of a mirror and looked into my own green eyes. The same eyes that had made Alaric drop a glass at the wedding. The same eyes as my mother's. And for the first time, I didn't see shame, scarcity, or the identity of a servant pasted onto me. I saw a survivor. A person learning how to trust again. A person who had finally reclaimed her name, her future, and her dignity. And if there is one thing I want to say to anyone hearing this story, it is this. Never let someone else's cruelty convince you that it is your true value. There are people who will trap you inside a smaller definition of yourself because it makes you easier to control. They will call it reality. They will call it duty. They will call it love in their own twisted way. But real love never asks you to shrink so that someone else can feel big. For 23 years, I believed I had been born to serve. Now I know I was born to be loved, to learn, to choose my own life, and to walk with my back straight instead of my head lowered. They tried to turn me into a shadow inside their house. But in the end, the truth dragged me into the light. And once I was standing in the light, I was never going back to the basement again.